In 2004, a train in Sri Lanka carrying about 1,500 passengers ended the day with nearly double that number aboard, and it became the deadliest rail disaster ever recorded, without the train itself ever doing anything wrong. That disaster holds the number one spot on this countdown of 10 rail catastrophes, spanning wartime troop trains, signal failures, gas explosions, and government cover-ups. Here's number 10. In the 10th place, the Quintonshire rail disaster stands as the deadliest train crash in British history. On May 22, 1915, a troop train filled with soldiers bound for the Western Front collided with a stationary local passenger train near Gretna, Scotland. The impact was catastrophic, and the wooden carriages quickly caught fire, claiming 227 lives, most of them young servicemen. The official inquiry traced the cause to a critical lapse by two signalmen, exhausted from long wartime shifts, who failed to follow safety protocols under intense pressure from increased traffic. The tragedy exposed how the demands of war magnified the risks of routine errors, leading to sweeping reforms in British railway signaling and staff management. Number 9. The Firozabad train disaster in India reveals how an everyday hazard can unravel an entire rail system. On a humid August night in 1995, a northbound express halted abruptly near Firozabad after striking a nilgai, a large antelope that had wandered onto the tracks. The emergency stop disrupted the signaling circuit, creating a false sense of safety for the following train. Within minutes, a packed passenger service plowed into the rear of the stationary train, crushing carriages and igniting a chain reaction collision that left 358 people dead. The tragedy exposed the fragility of single-point signaling and the absence of automatic train stop systems, turning a stray animal into the spark for one of India's worst rail catastrophes. 8th place, the Gaisal train collision in India stands as a stark example of how a single procedural error can spiral into mass tragedy. In the early hours of April 2, 1998, two express trains, one headed for New Delhi, the other for Guwahati, were mistakenly routed onto the same single-track line in the darkness of night. The resulting head-on collision killed nearly 290 people, with many more injured in the twisted wreckage. The disaster was triggered by a manual override of the automatic block signaling system, a decision made under pressure by a station master who believed the system was too restrictive. Reduced visibility and the absence of redundant safeguards meant there was almost no time to avert disaster. Unlike accidents caused by physical obstacles or natural forces, Gaisal's devastation unfolded entirely from a momentary lapse in human judgment, magnified by the limitations of nighttime rail operations. Number 7. The Bolzano train disaster in Italy reveals a rare and haunting scenario in railway history. In the early hours of March 3, 1944, a freight train overloaded with passengers and goods entered the Galleria delle Armi tunnel in the Apennine Mountains. As the train struggled up the grade, both steam locomotives began to stall inside the tunnel. Thick carbon monoxide from burning low-grade coal quickly filled the confined space. With no ventilation and most windows sealed against the cold, more than 500 people, many of them wartime stowaways and black market traders, succumbed to asphyxiation before help arrived. Official records list at least 517 dead, though later research suggests the toll may have reached 521 or even higher. The Italian Ministry of War classified the victims as war casualties and suppressed news of the tragedy for nearly 2 decades, fearing the impact on public morale during the final months of World War II. The Bolzano disaster stands apart not for a collision, but for the silent, invisible danger of exhaust gases, and for the way its story was hidden from the world. Number 6, the Ufa rail disaster in Soviet Russia stands as a chilling reminder of how the danger facing rail passengers can come from far beyond the tracks themselves. On June 4, 1989, a leaking natural gas pipeline running parallel to the Trans-Siberian Railway released a cloud of vapor that drifted unnoticed for hours. As two packed passenger trains passed each other near the village of Asha, a spark, possibly from the wheels or brakes, ignited the invisible gas. The resulting explosion tore through both trains with such force that the fireball was seen from miles away. In a matter of moments, 575 lives were lost, many of them families traveling to summer holidays. Unlike most rail disasters, UFO was not caused by operator error or mechanical failure on the trains, but by hazardous industrial infrastructure built dangerously close to a busy rail corridor. The aftermath led to sweeping changes in Russian safety regulations, mandating buffer zones between pipelines and railway lines to prevent such a tragedy from ever happening again. Number 5. The Syria train disaster in Romania unfolded during the harsh winter of 1917, as the country's railways strained under the pressures of war. A military train packed far beyond capacity with soldiers and refugees fleeing the advancing Central Powers derailed on a sharp curve near the town of Syria. The overcrowded carriages, many hastily added and lacking proper brakes, turned the runaway into a catastrophe. The wreck ruptured fuel tanks and ignited a fire that swept through the train. Death toll estimates reach as high as 600, but the chaos of wartime retreat and incomplete records left the true number uncertain. The Syria disaster stands as a stark reminder of how the desperation of retreat can force rail systems past their limits, with tragic and uncounted consequences. Number 4. The Modane rail disaster in France unfolded in December 1917 as a troop train packed with French soldiers began its descent from the Alps. The train, overloaded and equipped with too few brakes for the steep mountain grade, lost control as it wound through the darkness. Brake failure turned the descent into a runaway, and at a sharp curve near Saint-Michel-de-Maurienne, the train derailed and plunged into a ravine. Many of the wooden carriages caught fire, compounding the tragedy. Official records from the French Ministry of War listed 425 deaths, but contemporary press accounts and later research have placed the toll between 540 and over 700, a range complicated by the presence of unidentified soldiers and incomplete wartime records. The Modane disaster stands as a stark example of how the pressures of war, overcrowding, urgent troop movements, and strained equipment could turn a single technical failure into one of the deadliest rail catastrophes in European history. Coming to the top 3, the Bihar train disaster in India stands as a haunting example of how nature and infrastructure can combine to produce tragedy on an overwhelming scale. On June 6, 1981, a packed passenger train was crossing a bridge over the Bagmati River during the monsoon when a sudden cyclone struck. In moments, several carriages were blown off the tracks and plunged into the swollen river below. Official records put the death toll at 268, but survivors and local witnesses have long insisted the real number was far higher. Some estimates reach as high as 800. The true count may never be known, as many bodies were swept away or never recovered in the fierce current. The disaster exposed the vulnerabilities of aging bridges in flood-prone regions and the limits of disaster response in the face of severe weather. More than a matter of numbers, Bihar's legacy is the uncertainty that lingers, a stark reminder of how incomplete records and environmental extremes can obscure the full human cost of catastrophe. Number 2, the Torre del Bierzo rail disaster in Spain stands as one of the most contested tragedies in railway history. In the early hours of January 3, 1944, a mail express train suffered brake failure installed inside a mountain tunnel near the village of Torre del Bierzo. As railway staff scrambled to resolve the breakdown, a freight train entered the same tunnel, leading to a catastrophic collision. The impact ignited a fire that raged for hours, consuming carriages and making identification of victims nearly impossible. Under the Franco regime's strict press censorship, the official death toll was recorded as 78, a figure repeated in state records and newsreels. Yet survivors and local accounts have insisted the real toll was far higher. Some estimates range from 800 to 1,500 lives lost. In recent years, archival research has suggested a revised figure closer to 100, but the true number remains uncertain. The disaster's legacy is shaped as much by government secrecy as by the scale of the loss itself, serving as a stark reminder of how political control can obscure the full human cost of catastrophe. And finally, in first place, the Sri Lanka Tsunami train disaster stands apart as the deadliest rail tragedy ever recorded. On December 26, 2004, The coastal passenger service known as the Queen of the Sea was traveling south from Colombo, its carriages packed with families and holiday travelers. When the first tsunami wave struck, the train came to a halt near the village of Paralia. Believing the worst had passed, hundreds of local residents sought refuge by climbing onto the stationary train, hoping its mast would shield them from further danger. But a second, far larger wave swept in without warning, engulfing the entire train and the crowd surrounding it. 8 carriages were torn from the tracks and buried beneath water, debris, and sand. The loss of life was staggering. Estimates range from 1,700 to over 2,000, though the true number may never be known, as many victims were washed out to sea. Unlike every other disaster on this list, the primary cause was not a mechanical failure or human error, but the overwhelming force of nature itself. The Queen of the Sea became a symbol of both the vulnerability and resilience of those caught in the path of disaster. In the aftermath, the tragedy prompted a re-examination of disaster preparedness and early warning systems across the region, leaving a legacy that extends far beyond the railway itself. Across all 10 disasters, one pattern stands out. The deadliest train tragedies often reflect the turmoil of their era, war, overcrowding, and systemic neglect. The numbers may be disputed, but the human cost is undeniable. Which disaster was new to you? Subscribe for our next look at rail safety breakthroughs.